country is threatened by the water, the safest place to be is already on top of the water.
It's not a boat or a house, it's a hybrid.
Climate chaos is happening now. It's not happening in future or past, but it's already going on.
It's the future of humanity.
Sea levels will continue to rise, but by how much?
The Earth is getting hotter. The polar ice caps are melting. In Greenland and Antarctica, the ice is receding 6 times faster than expected. Sea levels around the world are rising. GEOMAR, the Helmholtz Center for Oceanic Research, is located in Kiel, Germany. Some of the world's top climate experts work here, including Mojib Latif, who studies global warming and its effects.
These enormous ice caps hold an immense amount of water. Just imagine if they were to melt away completely. Global sea levels would rise by about 60 meters.
An increase of that magnitude would radically alter the Earth's geography. Much of northern Europe could be submerged. The Netherlands would vanish underwater. But even a smaller increase would have a major impact. Major cities in coastal regions and further inland would be flooded. That includes London, Boston, Shanghai, Washington, D.C., and Mumbai.
That won't happen for decades or even centuries. But if we don't limit global warming, it will eventually be unstoppable. Even if we stop emitting greenhouse gases entirely, it will be too late.
These huge sheets of ice are dynamic systems. If they reach a tipping point, sea levels could rise a lot very quickly.
We know that happened at the end of the last ice age. We don't know if it could happen today. An increase of 1 meter or even 3 meters is possible by the end of the century.
Sea levels are rising, and eventually many coastal regions might be reclaimed by the ocean. Since the 19th century, global mean sea levels have risen by about 20 centimeters. In the South Pacific, sea levels are rising 2 to 3 times faster than the global mean. The island nation of Tuvalu might be the first to be swallowed by the waves. Fully 1/2 of the Netherlands lies just 1 meter above sea level. 1/4 is below sea level. The country is protected by a system of polders, dikes and dams, but for how long? The Netherlands is developing innovative concepts to deal with the projected rise in sea levels. Here in Amsterdam, a pilot project has created an entire community of floating homes. Sascha Glasel is a founding partner of the Space and Matter architectural studio. He and his family now live in one of the houseboats. A small building initiative began acquiring these sites about 10 years ago. There's room for about 30 homes. Houseboats here are nothing new, but this project is one of a kind.
Living on the water is incredible. It's a dream come true for me. This place feels like a vacation home. You come back from work and you feel relaxed, like you're on vacation.
Sascha designed the house himself. There's plenty of living space spread out over 3 levels. You won't find this kind of comfort on a traditional houseboat. This jetty connects the floating settlement to the mainland.
We've got connections to the power grid, sewage and water systems, the internet, and so on. It's a plug-and-play concept. It's simple and it works really well. It's like when you pull your motorhome into a camping site. You can connect to the entire infrastructure system. Living on the water gives you a lot of flexibility. You can expand the community quickly or make it smaller. You can reconfigure it again and again. This concept has huge potential.
These floating homes generate much of their own energy with photovoltaic solar panels. Right now, this site is purely residential, but Sasha believes that this might change one day.
Our vision is not limited to houseboats. You could also have floating schools, offices, and supermarkets. Just about any sort of structure, actually.
The Water Studio architectural firm is located in the town of Rijswijk. The company was founded by Koen Oldhaus. He's known around the world for developing floating solutions to problems posed by climate change and urbanization.
People call me a water architect, and for me that means that you use water to make cities better. So worldwide we try to take advantage of the water by building on water, by taking the flexibility of the water, and by that create cities that are more efficient and more adaptable.
The Dutch have been taming the water and fighting the rising and falling tides for centuries.
The Netherlands is an artificial country. We live underneath the sea level. And what we did, we built some dikes around it and we pumped water out. So now we have a dry country. But of course, with climate change, with more sea level rise, we can't keep everything dry. So we now have to see what's the next step in this fantastic machine we call the Netherlands.
But if sea levels continue to rise, the Netherlands will be among the first countries that have to deal with the impact.
Here we have to take a lot of effort to keep everything dry. And I think what other architects and other countries can learn from the Dutch is that you never can sit still. You have to think of next steps in your city and in your country. And we call this building for change. And building for change makes it that we have to be flexible. We have to be ready for any change in politics, in technology, in climate, in whatever comes to us. And with that we have to make sure that we can create new cities.
Koen Oldhaus envisions what he calls the Blue City, a floating metropolis that grows out of an existing city. By building on the water, structures or even districts could be relocated to respond to climate change or new social conditions. Koen Oldhaus is an optimist. He believes that architects and urban planners will play an important role in helping communities adapt to rising sea levels.
So we also have to deal with nature and we have to start living with the water. And that was the moment that this kind of floating architecture, taking use of the water, building top of the water, is the best. Because if your city or if your country is threatened by the water, the safest place to be is already on top of the water.
Here in Amsterdam's Eiburg district, people are already living in floating homes and apartment buildings. It's a model housing estate that features designs by a number of architects. The structures are anchored to the sea floor. Instead of garages, there are docks for boats. The neighbourhood is also different in another respect. It's connected to the mainland by a jetty, and the houses float on the water. So how were these structures actually built?
We make floating foundations that can be from concrete or from steel or from composites. And with that we can make very large floating platforms. And on top of the platforms we can build almost anything, from parks and green to houses to towers. And these big platforms we can connect to our cities on the water, on lakes, on rivers, on seas. And by that we can take advantage of that water space.
The range of possibilities seems endless. The Ocean Flower Complex in the Maldive Islands, with 185 villas and a floating golf course. The the Citadel apartment complex in the Netherlands, a design that would use the water to help cool the buildings, consuming 25% less energy than conventional structures. A plan for an entire floating city. It features self-contained modular construction and has lots of recreational space. A design for a floating mosque in the United Arab Emirates. And a 25-story hotel tower in Dubai, rotating on a floating foundation. But Koen Oldhaus is mainly interested in designing floating residential communities.
But only floating villas will never be enough. If you really want to cure the problems of space, you have to also do it in higher densities. And higher densities means that we also have to make floating towers. So the next steps for floating cities will be these floating mid-rise towers. So we're designing now a tower for Rotterdam, a floating office tower of mid-rise, so eight stories. And we do that in CLT, cross-laminated timber. And that being put on big floating foundations, you can create almost the same density as on land.
One basic idea underlies Water Studio's designs and accounts for its international success.
People ask me, do you want to live on the water yourself? Well, I have a family, I have 3 sons, and for me, I only want to live on the water if the quality of the comfort is exactly the same as on land. But today, with all the technology we have available, from the offshore industry and from the shipping industry, we can make platforms that nobody will even notice that you're underwater.
This is the Maasland storm surge barrier in the province of South Holland.
The last big flood was in 1953. Nearly 2,000 people were killed. The government said this can't happen again.
During the storm, 200 kilometers of dikes burst, and water levels quickly rose to 3 meters. An estimated 100,000 people lost their homes. Afterward, the government ordered the construction of a system of 15 storm surge barriers, dams and other structures.
The barriers aren't enough. They're just a part of the system that helps us to keep our feet dry. It sounds simple, but it's really quite complex.
The country is still battling the threat of flooding. Dikes are being rebuilt and planted with vegetation. Beaches are being widened and sand dunes raised. Rotterdam was hit hard by the 1953 floods. The Maasland barrier is one of the world's largest moving structures and now protects about 1 million people. The 2 large floating gates are each 240 meters long. The retaining walls are curved to withstand the force of the oncoming water. The barrier is closed only when a big storm is on the way. Rotterdam is Europe's largest seaport, and the barrier is designed to protect it too.
This is the only barrier of its kind that's run by a computer. We've worked hard to eliminate any technical complications.
It takes just 2 hours to close the gates. This only happens when the water level hits 3 meters.
Everyone in the Netherlands contributes to flood protection through the taxes they pay, even those who don't live near water. More than €1 billion goes into the flood control program every year.
The government also finances efforts to help parts of Rotterdam's city centre collect and drain excess water in an emergency. There's lots of open space in parking garages. They're designed so that they can take on runoff water during floods. Rotterdam is particularly vulnerable to storm surges because of its coastal location and because it sits in the delta created by the Rhine and Maas rivers. Here's an unusual design, floating pavilions. They're covered with a special foil that's 100 times lighter than glass, and they're environmentally friendly, cooled by surface water and heated with solar energy. The pavilions are now home to a floating cinema. Nearby, a floating park, hexagonal islands made of recycled plastic. They've been planted with vegetation and already seem to be drawing a crowd. For a unique city getaway, you can rent this small houseboat called a Wickelboot. It's wrapped in 24 layers of corrugated cardboard, which makes it light and just about soundproof. The interior features a kitchen, bathroom, living room and terrace. This Wickelboot is located near the Rotterdam city centre, with easy access to sightseeing and restaurants. Despite all the comfort, there are constant reminders that you're living on the water. We now return to Amsterdam and the Eiburg district, with its 75-unit housing estate.
It's not a boat or a house, it's a hybrid. We had the units built at a shipyard on the IJsselmeer, a big lake east of Amsterdam. That way, construction work wouldn't be interrupted by bad weather, even in winter. That summer, when the units were finished, they were shipped through the locks to us here. They're anchored to steel poles that were driven 16 meters into the lakebed. We designed the connections so that they could bridge the difference in height. That difference is caused by the tides, but it's not very big, like 60 centimeters. And the units can move. That includes the jetties, which cover the utility lines for gas, water, heating, and so on. We put the lines in flexible tubes, which are connected to the units, and they can handle the rise and fall of the tides. The different levels were also designed to adapt to the tides.
The units actually sit on a floating foundation that's composed of airtight concrete tubs.
We chose concrete because it's heavy and displaces water, based on Archimedes' principle. Depending on its weight, concrete can displace many cubic meters of water. We made concrete tubs in different sizes to balance the weight. For example, a bathroom is heavy, so we made the concrete basin thicker on the opposite side to offset the increased weight. We explain all this to the residents. So, if someone has a heavy sofa and a piano on one side of the unit, they can alter the balance by installing air-filled tanks underneath the structure.
What else can the Netherlands teach us about finding new ways to build on and with water?
You have to have the courage to try something new. People in other countries could use our projects as an example. You also have to be willing to experiment.
The Netherlands also drew on an example, the famous houseboat community in the city of Sausalito, California, which dates back to the 1950s. Like many communities built on water, its legal status remained vague for years.
We also had difficulties getting a mortgage. The banks couldn't decide whether they were dealing with a boat or a house, so we had to come up with new solutions.
In July 2019, Paris recorded an all-time high temperature, 42 degrees Celsius. City residents are learning to live with climate extremes, from high heat to heavy rain and flooding. Paris hosted the UN Climate Change Conference in 2015, where delegates set a goal to limit the global temperature increase to well below 2 degrees Celsius in this century. Renowned architect and oceanographer Jacques Rougerie has lived on this houseboat in the heart of Paris for more than 4 decades. It's located near the Place de la Concorde and also includes his design studio.
The 2 great adventures of mankind are space and the sea. This is the future of humanity.
Rougerie has been working on this futuristic project for decades, an ocean-based research vessel called the Sea Orbiter. It's shaped like a seahorse. The project still only exists as a model, but its plans call for a total height of 58 meters, with 31 meters below the water's surface. Up to 22 scientists could work in the vessel. Rougerie says that we know less about the sea than we do about space.
There are millions of creatures to study. For example, the diversity of zooplankton is immeasurable. We only know a fraction of it.
The scientists, Rougerie calls them aquanauts, would live in pressurized chambers so that they could take part in diving expeditions at any time.
I've lived underwater. I've been involved in a dozen projects in this habitat. I've set world records for living underwater. It's been extraordinary.
Swiss oceanographer Jacques Picard was an early supporter of the project.
Picard worked in the deepest parts of the ocean, at 11,000 meters. Picard always encouraged me in my research on underwater settlements. And so he and I decided to develop a research lab that would be like the International Space Station. It could drift with the ocean currents and provide a base for scientists, like a beehive. The worker bees would fly out and collect scientific data on the marine environment.
Rougerie says he was inspired by the work of 2 of his countrymen, Jules Verne and Jacques-Yves Cousteau. In 1962, Cousteau spent a week in his underwater research facility, Conshelf. He hoped it would be the dawn of a new age of marine exploration. In the 1970s, Rougerie began to imagine this future of laboratories and entire villages on the ocean floor. If climate change continues to progress, the idea of underwater settlements could become popular again. Rougerie designed this huge floating research centre shaped like a manta ray. It would be 900 metres long and 500 metres wide and could accommodate up to 7,000 people. His Teti Aroa design imagines underwater rooms designed for holidaymakers.
One day we'll have space tourism and also underwater tourism, with facilities like hotels and research centers. A new reality is taking shape because it has to.
Other architects are getting on board. The US firm Solus 4 came up with this idea for a marine research station to be based off the coast of Bali. Italian architect Gianluca Santosuoso developed this concept for a modular floating structure called Hypercay. The individual units resemble vertebrae in the human spine. It's like a cross between a cruise ship and a hotel. The German architecture firm Gavers Puderville has designed a hotel that's to be built off the Chinese island of Hainan. The individual suites would lie below the surface of the sea. Margot Krasojevich came up with plans for a lighthouse hotel that harnesses wave energy to generate electricity. Some designs have actually been built. The Jules Undersea Lodge in Florida, which opened in 1986, bills itself as the world's first underwater hotel. This is the Atlantis Luxury Hotel Resort, located on the coast of Dubai. It has more than 1,500 rooms spread out over 23 floors and an aquarium that contains more than 65,000 marine animals. The Ita'a undersea restaurant in the Maldive Islands is located 5 meters below sea level. Europe now has its first fully submerged restaurant. It's called the Under, located on the southern coast of Norway. It was designed by the Oslo-based architecture firm Snøhetta. The same firm also developed the concept for this 100-room hotel that lies at the foot of a glacier in the Norwegian Arctic. The hotel will run mostly on energy generated by solar panels. Most of the plans are still dreams for the future, designed by visionaries like Jacques Rougerie.
I'm a dreamer, but I'm also extremely pragmatic. I make my dreams reality. I build my dreams, and to do that, you have to be able to think clearly. Our society has caused a lot of destruction over the last 100 years, and we continue to destroy. But we can't let these catastrophes continue. We have to find solutions and implement them step by step.
Another vision for living in a marine environment, the ocean spiral. It has 2 main elements, a sphere and tower structure that would provide living and workspace for up to 5,000 people, and a spiral structure that connects the sphere to a base station on the ocean floor. Russian architect Alexander Remizov has designed a modern-day Noah's Ark that could accommodate up to 10,000 people. This water scraper concept comes from Malaysia, a floating building that would generate its own food and electricity and house thousands. But are ideas like this truly a utopia?
These would be stopgap measures. I don't think people want to live underwater. Humans are used to living on land. Of course, it's technically possible to live underwater, but I think our quality of life would really suffer.
The world's less affluent regions will be hit hard by the effects of climate change.
Asia is going to impact a lot. So if I say Mumbai is one of them, Jakarta is one of them, Osaka, Japan is going to have a flood. So as per the United Nations, it's on high alert actually. The whole Asia is in a big threat to the rising sea level.
Some coastal areas in Asia are already taking steps to deal with rising sea levels.
Jakarta has to move its center, Indonesia, they have to move the whole city center to somewhere else 40 kilometers away, which is they're already working on. By 40 or something like that, they have to move their city to some other place. They already have a plan which are ongoing. I think it could be a similar situation for Mumbai also.
Some 28 million people live in the Mumbai metropolitan region. The core of the city is built on several islands that lie in the Arabian Sea. This is a low-lying area, and rising sea levels pose a very real threat. Austrian architect Rames Najar says that coastal cities like Mumbai must adapt to these conditions, and that could include building floating communities.
I'm convinced that entire cities will one day be built on water. You can't rely on putting up barriers made of sand or other materials. Cities will have to be built on floating surfaces. This new development would offer a number of advantages, particularly the construction of infrastructure near the city center and projects that generate energy.
Rames Najar proposes the use of floating turbines that generate electricity by taking in water. The concept is similar to that used with hydroelectric dams in the Austrian Alps.
The technology comes from Austria. We have a lot of experience with hydroelectric plants. And the other element is the creative side, where architects can play a role.
Rames and his brother, who's also an architect, have been designing water-based communities for years, and they're convinced that these projects will become reality.
It's realistic because it's going to be a step-by-step process. I don't think we'll be seeing mega projects in coastal cities. The projects will grow slowly and gradually.
With sea levels rising ever more quickly, solutions are urgently needed. Millions could be displaced by climate change.
Do you
know how many climate refugees there will be? More than 200 million. 200 to 300 million climate refugees. Where will they go? These refugees will come from developing countries, not wealthy countries. 300 million people. Where will they live? Will Bangladesh or India take them in? Absolutely not.
In low-lying coastal countries like Bangladesh, they can't do much to stop the rising water. They can't build dikes or other flood protection structures like we have in Germany and the Netherlands. For one thing, they don't have the money. And it's simply not realistic to build dikes along the entire coast. So even if the sea level rose by just 50 centimeters, millions of people would be affected.
9 of the world's 10 largest cities are expected to be threatened by rising sea levels by 2050. They will have to develop a long-term plan for adapting to their new reality.
You have to set a reasonable time frame. It could be 100 years. But what is 100 years in the grand scheme of things? You have to have imagination, like our ancestors who built cathedrals. The sons of those architects and stonemasons never saw the completed project that their fathers had begun. The grandchildren didn't either, but they had a vision for the future. You have to have that vision. The future is just a brief period of time in the course of human evolution. 100 or even 500 years means nothing. Centuries ago, people used to take a long-term view.
One of these long-term projects is Jacques Rougerie's design for a floating city off the Pacific island of Tahiti. The US-based Seasteading Institute has developed a concept for a floating city project led by political theorist Patry Friedman. The co-founder of PayPal is also on board. The idea has a political dimension. The sovereign ocean colonies would be free from state control. But floating communities must be available to everyone, not just the wealthy. The Oceanics project is being developed in coordination with the United Nations. The goal is to make floating cities available to the many coastal regions that are under threat. Those solutions are urgently needed. Nearly half of the world's population lives within 100 kilometers of a coastline. Oceanic cities could grow and adapt, housing anywhere from 300 to 10,000 people. The threat of rising sea levels might be right around the corner. Hamburg in northern Germany could also be at risk.
It's a real danger. Hamburg is located just 100 kilometers from the coast. And research indicates that if the sea level continues to rise, the risk of storm surges would increase significantly.
Newsreels recall the flood of 1962, when a storm surge washed over the dikes and flooded the North Sea coast. About 100,000 people lost their homes and hundreds of people were killed. The storm destroyed dikes along several hundred kilometers of coastline. Hamburg was cut off for days. Local residents were scarcely able to cope. And the situation today may be even more dangerous because since 1962, the sea level here has risen by 20 centimeters. This is the port of Hamburg. More than 350,000 people who live in this part of the city are still threatened by storm surges. A lot of new projects are underway to protect them. This new promenade along the Elbe River also serves as a flood control structure. It was designed by Zaha Hadid architects. The promenade rises nearly 9 meters above the river.
Hamburg is building a lot of new dikes. The authorities are doing what they can, but I'm not sure whether we can really protect ourselves against major storm surges. For example, the Hafen City district, which was built on the site of the old port, is especially vulnerable. If sea levels were to rise by several meters, I doubt we could prevent flooding there.
If water levels in the North Sea continue to rise, London may also be affected.
Many large cities are at risk, and that includes London. If sea levels rise by 2 meters, I would assume that many parts of London would face serious problems.
About 9 million people live in London, which is located on the River Thames. About 1/3 of those residents live in the city's central districts along the river. The Thames flows into the North Sea, but rising and falling tides still affect river water levels in London. 1/6 of the city lies in an area that's threatened by flooding. Rising sea levels would put more than 1 million people and 500,000 buildings here at risk. Storm surges and floods have become more common in Britain. In late 2013 and early 2014, southern England was hit by a series of severe storms. Heavy rainfall caused widespread flooding and power cuts and disrupted transport systems. In London, the Thames burst its banks and many people were forced to leave their homes. The Thames Barrier is designed to protect the floodplain that includes most of Greater London from tides and storm surges that move in from the North Sea. It's one of the world's largest movable flood protection structures. The barrier consists of 10 huge steel gates that are usually submerged, but can be raised into position in case of emergency.
In my opinion, the Thames barrier design in future is one of the best examples of adaptation nowadays. It's reaching the end of its lifetime, and there have been extensive studies to extend the usability of the Thames barrier. There have been studies that have looked at a very wide range of scenarios, up to, for example, rises of 4 meters.
But some studies predict an increase of 5 meters by 2100. The barrier was completed in the early 1980s, when scientists were predicting a much smaller rise in sea levels. But now, reality is outstripping those projections.
I think London can be protected. There is lots of investment. London is a big international hub, so it will be protected. No matter how well we protect a place like that, so a megacity or a coastal megacity, there is always some risk remaining in case of failure, defense failure, and this is something that is considered in the design and we should be prepared for.
The barrier will need to be updated. Sea levels are rising faster than anticipated, and London is at the forefront of planning for an uncertain future.
Definitely London is setting the example for coastal megacities, although it's not exactly coastal, but for cities that can be affected by coastal flooding. But there are other examples worldwide, and for example the Mose barrier in Venice Lagoon, and of course different solutions will fit in different places.
But few coastal regions have a huge barrier like this to protect them from storm surges. If sea levels keep rising, many communities could be left to make difficult decisions.
Some areas may simply have to be abandoned. In parts of Wales, for example, communities are realizing they are living on borrowed time. Local governments don't have the money to pay for flood protection. So people will have to start thinking about where they're going to live 30, 40, or 50 years from now.
Floating homes like these in Amsterdam could offer refuge in a crisis.
In the event of an emergency, for example, you could move houseboats to hard-hit areas fairly quickly to provide people with temporary accommodations.
For now, most people here who live on the water do so because they want to.
You're so close to the water that you can actually go swimming or kayaking anytime you want. A floating home is like an expansion of the city. Cities keep getting more densely populated, and buildings keep getting taller. But as a living space, water is still largely untapped.
In affluent communities, floating homes are a lifestyle, a way to bring nature into the city. But they also offer new ideas for adapting to climate change.
You can either work against the water by building bigger barriers and so forth, or you can work with the water and embrace it. And that's what we're trying to do with this project.
The sea is coming toward us, and we have no one to blame but ourselves. If we hadn't pumped so many greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, we wouldn't have this global warming and rising sea levels. So this really is a problem that we ourselves have created.